let me get to the culture and institutions distinction via a kind of an account of what I was trying to do in Punishment in Modern Society and what I was doing in Peculiar Institutions. So back in the 1980s, that book was published in 1990, we were only beginning to see the emergence of a kind of research field, which is now quite well known as punishment in society, or the sociology of punishment. There had basically been some classic studies by Emile Durkheim, more recently by Rushan Kirkheimer and Michel Foucault, but there wasn't a kind of research program which carved out punishment and penal institutions and penal control as a topic of sociological research with a theory and a methodology that people could utilize. Instead, when criminologists and especially penologists thought about punishment, they mostly thought about it as a kind of a technical means for dealing with crime, a kind of mode of crime control. And in part, although there was clearly a moral question about which punishments were morally acceptable, which ones were morally problematic, there was a sense in which punishment was really about a reaction to crime, a technical, if efficacious or not efficacious way of dealing with the problem of crime. What I tried to do in Punishment in Modern Society was to shift away from the technical penology, where punishment is just a reaction to crime, to a sociological approach that says punishment is a social institution with dynamics and meanings and functions of its own that go beyond crime control. In fact, in many respects, and Emile Durkheim makes this point, in many respects, punishment is a very inefficient mode of crime control. Most offenses that occur in the world are never brought to court and convicted and punished. Most of the time, if we prevent crime, we do it not by punishing offenders or threatening to punish offenders, but by the mainstream processes of socializing young people, integrating them into work and into family and into the group of which they form a part. Punishment is really what happens when that goes wrong, a kind of backup. And more importantly, the way that we as a society punish typically is instituted and organized and exercised in very different ways in different cultures and different societies and different kinds of different nations and different political economies. So sociologists are interested in punishment not as a crime control mechanism, but as an expression of social organization, or as an outcome of a mode of production, or as an elaboration of forms of power and knowledge. In other words, social theorists have encountered punishment typically as one institution amongst others that they're interested in because it's part of a kind of a separate research agenda. For example, in my 1990 book, In Punishment in Modern Society, I don't really try and tell an intellectual history of how punishment has been thought about. What I try to do is to identify different theoretical frameworks and different theoretical traditions in sociology and ask myself, how do these theorists think about the question of punishment within the problematic, within the conceptual framework that they have launched for their own purposes? So for example, Emile Durkheim is interested in explaining what is it that creates social order and social organization within a complex society. And his assumption is that basically shared values and rituals that uphold these values are the essential basis for any social cohesion, any social solidarity that a society can have. And he sees punishment rituals, the organized response of authorities to the violation of social norms by an offender. He sees punishment as a kind of ritual, not for controlling crime, but instead for reaffirming values that have been violated by an offender in a ritual of a kind of theatrical performance that says, here are the norms in which we believe, this person violates them, he should be anathematized and punished. Punishment is a kind of communication, not to the offender who's not listening because he's poorly socialized, but to the onlooking citizens who are reminded and have their values reaffirmed in a kind of collective effervescence of what it is that we believe in common that makes us solidaristic. So for Durkheim, punishment is very interesting, but not because he's a criminologist or because he's interested in punishment, but because it's one ritual amongst others that happens to uphold solidarity, which is his topic and which is sociology's oriented understanding. By contrast, Marxist thinkers, writers like Rushin Kirkheimer, or indeed Dario Molossi and Maximo Pavarini, or Douglas Hay, all in their different ways, Marxist thinkers have taken the Marxist framework, which understands society as a social formation organized around a mode of production, which in a class society is a conflictual, contradictory mode of production, which is reproduced both by economic forces and by the overlaying ideological and political processes. They see punishment within that theoretical frame. And classically, in the 1930s, republished in 1964, 1968, Rushin Kirkheimer said that punishment and penal history can be understood if we look at the mode of production and we look at the way that labor is exploited in the mode of production. And then we see that the value of labor might be high or low depending, and that the way in which the offenders and criminals are treated really is a kind of supplement and a reinforcement to the labor market. So that in times of labor scarcity, we take the labor of prisoners or people in public works, we take it to have value, and we put these people to work and we utilize their labor. At times when there's a surfeit of labor in the labor market, these become expendable people who can just be put to unproductive labor or put to death or transported away. Later on, when the working class becomes an industrial working class, a proletariat paid with wage labor, we can begin to use the monetary penalty of the fine to sanction more and more offenders. So for Rushin Kirkheimer, punishment is really one mechanism amongst others whereby the labor market with its class contradictions and its exploitation is simply reproduced at the margins. So Durkheim is doing sociology, Marxism is doing its own kind of political economy sociology, and punishment features for them in particular ways, very different ways, although they sometimes overlap. I can talk about that if you'd like. But Michel Foucault, Max Weber, Clifford Geertz, Norbert Elias, each of them does the same thing. They develop their own particular thematic and conceptual framework and objective analysis. And by the way, they talk about punishment. Foucault used punishment to exemplify modern forms of power and knowledge and the way they relate to bodies. Norbert Elias didn't talk about punishment, but if he did, it would be a way of thinking about how civilized sensibilities change our relationship to disturbing, difficult social conditions, such as death or disease, in this case, deviance. We put it behind the scenes, we allocate it to specialists, we surround it with euphemisms, we avoid kind of physical violence and the sight of suffering. That's what the modern penitentiary and the modern modes of lethal injection do. What I tried to do in the Punishment Society book was say, look, each of these different sociologists is glancing at punishment en route to some other destination. What I want to do, and what my colleagues who are developing the sociology of punishment are trying to do, is center as an object of analysis the complicated, interesting institutions and practices of criminal punishment. And if we center that and make that our object of analysis and the core of our intellectual agenda, then each of these theoretical programs maybe has something to offer us. Maybe they're not, alternatives. Maybe there are actually perspectives that bring into focus different dimensions, different aspects, different facets of a complicated reality. It's almost like, if you can imagine this, like a cubist painting where a three-dimensional phenomena has been flattened out and its different sides have been seen in 2 dimensions. So my concern was to kind of render punishment again as a complex 3-dimensional, multi-dimensional phenomenon, and borrow from the Marxists and the Durkheims and the Foucaults and the Eliases. And so the end of the book, Punishment in Modern Society, is a proposal for a theory of punishment as a social institution, which has its own dynamics, its own internal processes, and which is relatively autonomous of the economy or of morality or of politics, and which has to be understood in terms of these processes. Now, I brought into focus culture, because it seemed to me that that at the time in the 1980s, there was a kind of an emphasis upon Marxist and Foucauldian theories that stressed power and control. And what I wanted to suggest is that much of the way that we punish, the choice about what a prison should look like, or about who should be fined, or about the character of an execution technology, much of this is shaped not by the technical concern to maximize control, but was shaped by cultural symbolism and sensibilities. And what I wanted to emphasize was the extent to which the way we punish is shaped by our cultural dispositions and recipes and routines. So the book ends up emphasizing culture as well as control, symbols as well as power, and bringing these together.